All right, welcome everybody. This is a public meeting of the West Bend School District and School Board Curriculum Committee. It is 4 p.m. on Friday, April 19th, 2024. We will start with introductions. My name is Melanie Ergott, School Board Member.
June Kruger, School Board Member.
Kelly Lang, School Board Member.
Quinn Trueblood, Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
Erin Faust, Program Administrator.
Tina Van Root, District Data and Assessment Coordinator.
Heather Isaacson, Program Administrator.
Kelly Downs, Curriculum Coordinator.
All right, so our first discussion item tonight will be the Act 20 Early Literacy Law Update and Community Survey Results of Primary Resource. And I'll turn that over to Ms. Heather Isaacson.
Good afternoon. Happy Friday. As you remember, the last time that we were together, the district literacy team recommended Amplify CKLA as the primary resource for ELA in grades K through 4 after a rigorous vetting process involving over 120 staff members. The district literacy team also took a team of teachers and administrators from each grade level and building to the Grafton Area School District to see the resource in use. We got a presentation from the Director of Curriculum and Instruction there as to their process, which was very similar to our process before they adopted. And the staff was able to ask questions of the teachers that were there that day as well. They then came and debriefed and created a presentation for their colleagues that was given during the April 1st Professional Development Day. And then the staff were then able to ask questions of those teachers who had attended the Grafton School District. So it was a really great opportunity for us to see the resource in use. So just as a reminder, 64% of our staff chose CKLA. And we do know that it may be the second or third choice of other staff in the district, and we're aware that some staff may have some concerns about the developmental and cultural appropriateness of Amplify CKLA. We also know that no program or resource is perfect, and that we have devised a plan to address any of those concerns through the CKLA curricular rationale and social justice guide, and we also can make simple lesson modifications if necessary. The primary resource was made available to community members for review and feedback from March 22nd, 2024 through April 12th, 2024 at 2 locations, the ESC and the West Bend Public Library. During this window, 1 community member registered their name and 0 survey responses were recorded. The district literacy team requests to present Amplify CKLA to the board for discussion as part of the adoption process. Any questions?
I have one question. So you were able to go over to the Grafton Area School District and see it in action. How many years or how long have they been practicing or using this criteria?
So this was their first full year of implementation. They had started using it in the previous year, but not to full implementation. So this was their first year of implementation. Yep.
Okay. I'm going to try to get this all out. I have a lot of thoughts right now, so bear with me for a second. So I had met with a group of teachers that had some concern and about what we addressed and maybe implementing it really quickly. They didn't necessarily think that it was the greatest, and I referenced that, the 64% had said that this was the best. Their concern was that there wasn't an other option, so you had to choose, like, this was maybe the best of what was presented. So, like, you only gave the 3 or 4 options, was it? And then it was like, well, we don't really like any of these. There wasn't a 5th option to say, like, is there anything else? So after meeting with them, I decided, I just kind of did my own research. I did actually go to the library. I looked at all of these. I didn't sign them out, so maybe other people have done this too. I just sat there and looked at everything. I did talk to other people and heard varying like loved it to hate it. There is definitely a big variance of who likes it and what they think of it. I also talked to another school district that is in a pilot program of this, and they really enjoy it. But I'm also wondering if like the pilot piece of it was not quite as enforcing of, is like saying you have to use this, we know that this is gonna be the best thing possible. Is it possible at this point, or is it too late in the game to say we're gonna pilot this and just get the real feedback afterwards?
We did decide as a district not to pilot the resource. And I wouldn't recommend that we piloted any resource. The process that we went through was very thorough by looking at the criteria that the Early Literacy Council set forth for the science of reading. And so the teachers have had the opportunity with the samples that we have to try out those lessons in their classroom, and they're beginning to do that. We also have our reading specialists who are going in and modeling lessons for teachers. So I wouldn't recommend a pilot of any resource.
Could I also add, just to augment Ms. Isaacson's comment about pilots, there is an old world notion of the purpose of pilots and how you implement them or execute a pilot. Our literacy specialists are very well up to date on the function of a modern day pilot. And it has actually been resolved that they are actually not impactful. And what you end up doing sometimes is you have control groups, which are students, and you don't want to be doing things to them that may not be so good. So you want to front load that, and this is really the recommendation and the expertise by our literacy specialists to tease out that argument so that it isn't just a, no, we're not going to. Here's the reasons why we would pilot, and here's the reasons why we wouldn't pilot. And it was really very much well debated, and I was aware of this discussion, and I'm very, very pleased with the fact that there were more concerns with pilots than there were impact positives for them.
No, that's good to hear. I still am so surprised at the varying opinions on this, and I don't know why I'm surprised by this anymore. Like, why am I shocked by these wide opinions? But I was, and I really did talk to a lot of people because I wanted to get the feedback from a lot of different grades, schools, even districts. So I was just curious to see the reason behind not doing that, so I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to, perhaps you know more because you were out there talking to our teachers, but a lot of times the debate is not about the actual materials, it's about the position we are in society. And these are whether we are a liberal society or whether we are a conservative society, and how our social position in the world that we live in our head translates into the words for which the people who produce the materials can make them. So I'll just be, I think I was long-winded there, but for instance, there are people who really believe in a modern world. And so a modern world could be something like more inclusive, more DEI-ish. And so the text would represent that, but nationally speaking, we are in a conservative stance. And so these publishers would always make materials for which match the communities for which they can be purchased. So that is a very overarching explanation for why we cannot meet everybody's needs. It's not necessarily curricular, it's more about how expansive and what kind of word choices we would use to describe an element or an event. So I just wanted to provide that as context for, is it a good curriculum? For sure, it has all the nuts and bolts, but are they using the words that we prefer sometimes to describe very fundamental, basic knowledge that everybody agrees to? There's disagreement there.
I appreciate it, and I mean, I know that there a lot of work went into this. But it was great to hear how much passion was behind on all sides, and so I just really appreciate, and I wanted to share that with everybody. That it came from district, it came from schools, it came from staff, it came from there was a lot of passion behind this. So it's exciting to see that people feel so strongly about this.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Regardless of if they love it or hate it.
Sure.
Could I just add one more thing to close this discussion? I am very much committed to the process with Ms. Isaacson and our team that for our staff who really, really have very strong positions, we will work with everybody. We will find a way. What we want to do is teach kids. And so whatever our stances are, that won't get in the way of teaching our kids. And so our team is very much committed to working with individual staff members to move them along in a direction where it's collaborative and we're serving students. So I want you to know that that is a commitment that we've already laid out.
Could you remind me the timeline? I know this was for Act 20.
Correct.
I know that was put in last year, meaning the law.
Sure.
And so what was that timeline again for us getting to, I guess, adhering to the changes and implementing the changes so that we're meeting the requirements in that law?
We need to be in compliance with our teaching strategies by the 24-25 school year. And so that was the reason for the escalated timeline for implementing a new resource. One of the reasons behind that was the resource that we currently have has some of the language and some of the philosophies that are explicitly prohibited by the law, and to try to teach teachers how to implement that to be in compliance with the law would have been such a huge overhaul. We decided as a district literacy team that we wanted to explore resources that were in compliance and that met all of the criteria of the science of reading and the early literacy law. Yeah.
So this would be, I guess, the formal request to move this to board discussion, not at the next meeting, of course, but the meeting following, in order to make that agenda item. Yes, you can if you'd like. Yes.
I'd like to motion to put, to bring this forward to the full board for consideration.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, our next discussion item here is the proposed recommendations for the book clubs.
Thank you. This is the committee's several discussion now, and we're at a point where we can begin to ask for formalization of very discrete ideas that we'll bring forward to the board for their discussion. And so you'll see before you the proposed recommendations, and there are 6 areas in which the recommendations will fall. It'll be revising definitions. It'll be defining a review process with very specific considerations for determining whether a text is appropriate. It also involves redefining grade bands, resetting threshold levels, revising communication and notification parameters, and lastly, revising the format of that notification. Now, before we get into the actual considerations of each of these recommendations, I'd like to just remind everyone that these recommendations were well-formed over a series of months, beginning in September of last year, and there were several sources for these recommendations, namely the discussions from the school, the board's iterative process. I should be able to say that by now. Also, very well noted observations and challenges that this committee has identified. Also, our department has provided some clear guidance. And lastly, we had 2 surveys, one from our staff and one from our parents and our guardians. So the totality of this information, of all the information from all of these different sources, really did produce these very specific recommendations. So I want to thank everyone who's been involved with this, because it has been a slow and arduous process, but we want to do it well, and I think we definitely have been. So thank you. So I'll just start. And if it's okay with the members here, if we can go line item by line item, because they are identified that way, I think it'd be just more clear for the record, okay? So we will start with definitions and the review process, and what you can see in front of you is our board policy is on the left side in terms of the definition itself for graphic violence, and the considerations are listed in order by item 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I won't read these out loud, but what I can do is just call out each of these, and if there's any discussion or any recommendation, we'll note that. So consideration V1, or GV1, sorry, graphic violence 1.
I just have a question. Will the new definitions be including all 4 of these items, or are we trying to like choose one? Or what is?
Well, I'm sorry. So let me walk through that again. So the definition itself right now is actually GV3. When we look at that, it says depicts, describes, and represents a patently offensive way with respect to the age group, expressions of hostility and rage with the intent to injure or damage people or property through physical force. That would be what I consider to be the most explicit definition, and it would be recommended to replace what we have existing for the definition itself. Does that make sense? So since we're there, is there any discussion or comments on GV3 as the replacement definition?
Question. So if the material meets that guideline or that definition, would it be struck out when we see a book list come forward, or would it be not struck out?
If it meets this inappropriate level, it would not come forward. You would not see it. Now that there's a review process, because remember, if we look at the review process here, we'd look at these materials for graphic violence or language or image that depicts graphic violence. We'd have to look at it through that it wouldn't be selected at all, okay? But in the non-selected, I'm not saying this right, but if we have material that is inappropriate, we would not select it. So that's your question right there, Ms. Kruger. But in order to be not selected, we'd have to make sure that it is developmentally appropriate, age appropriately, and then lastly, that it would meet the standard of having some literary, artistic, political, historical, or scientific value. If it doesn't have those things, then we would not even select it, and especially if it has graphic violence and it lacks all of the seriousness of what I just mentioned. So I guess I'm just explaining the framework, that if we have graphic violence in a text, that though it's developmentally appropriate, it may lack some of these elements, so we would never consider them. They would not be selected.
So the books would be meeting like all 4 of these, correct?
Yes, that would be the review standard, yes.
The review standard. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just asked if the books that were chosen would be meeting all 4 of these.
It has to meet all 4, otherwise it cannot really be considered, or it would be, either it's going to be considered or it's going to be considered appropriate. It depends on if you're going to do inappropriate or appropriate. I like to consider it more appropriate than inappropriate.
Right.
But either way, it has to meet these 4 prongs, if you will, in order to appear on a list.
Right, and so then the difference for this would just be saying that what is age or grade appropriate for students, right?
That's
So
correct. And I think, just to remind everybody, that was really one of the very strong survey feedback, that the prior filter was too restrictive, certainly for the 9-12, and really probably on the line for the grade 8 also. So this allows for that is appropriate for age. And just as a couple to make more sense of it. This is just the process. There will be some thresholds that I'll be presenting to you and grade bands. That's when we're going to get more specific on developmental age and on thresholds. But this is really, will the books come before on a list? They have to meet these 4 criteria. So I hear that we'll take the 4 criteria?
Question, so like consideration GV1, are you saying that at the next stage, that's when we will talk about like what is, like where the bandwidth is of
Yeah.
appropriateness?
Yes.
That's the next step. So like, GV1 says it contains, and it may be considered inappropriate for students will not be selected. So that's where I'm getting caught up is, I feel like, is this coming before we talk about the appropriate level?
They're together.
Okay.
But let's work through this, and then actually, I was trying to break it apart, but we'll have to put it back together. But I know what you're saying. Let's go through the grade bands and go through the thresholds, and we can come back to this also. Okay. But generally speaking, this would be the framework for how do we know, how do teachers know? Like, which books would be permissible and which would not. Okay. This should help them quite a bit, actually. So going to sexual content, which is on page 2, again, we're looking at the revision and a definition and also the same review process. There are a few additional elements here, though. I'd like to draw your attention to SC5. That is the replacement definition. That is a lot more descriptive than what we have presently.
I like the inclusion of the SC3 using the human growth and development curriculum as a reference to determine where the material is age or grade appropriate. I think that helps to kind of give some more clarity for that.
We've completed our sexual content definition and process.
Yeah.
Will you take them all? Okay, thank you. The last one is excessive obscene language, and this requires a little bit more explanation. If we look at the present description in our policy, there is use of obscene language that includes language that is deemed derogatory or obscene, and there are some examples. This definition has proven to provide very little guidance in our review process and our vetting process. So what I would recommend, given the amount of time of profanity on the discussions, that's where most of the attention has been placed. So I'd like to ask you to consider to replace the definition and clarify it, because that is something that is going to be very helpful to our teachers and to our team here, that it is going to be defined as profanity. And my recommendation comes from the fact that I'll go back to the FCC, which is the regulatory body for the broadcasting community. And I'll remind you that the FCC also struggled with the word obscene. Couldn't quite nail that. Also that they do have some guidance on what is considered a they don't use the word profanity, they call them dirty words, and there are 7 of them. And there's still a very strong caveat that even words that are considered profane are permissible when taken in context. That is the key indicator that they will not publish what are the actual profane words, and they will not define them, because everybody has a subjective interpretation based on, you know, how they grew up, the families they have, the communities they live in. But what you can do is always place those words within context. And so you'll see that this set of recommendations for profanity will consider very strongly context. So I will stop there and reiterate that the request is to redefine this entire category to simply profanity. We are unable to describe what obscene is, and so I would rather not guess at that. And if we're really looking at profanity, we should focus on profanity. So I will stop there and
So my question is, obviously when the permission slips come out, like if some level of profanity is considered appropriate for like a certain grade level, it will still be listed on the permission slip that it contains some or something to that effect, or?
yes, for sure. Depending on where you fall on what the descriptors are and the threshold levels are, I would recommend that that's the word we use.
Yeah.
I would recommend that we don't place X's on anymore. I recommend that if there is some, but it's permissible and age appropriate and within context and has value, based on all those things we talked about, then we would list it as some.
Yeah.
Or we would list it as limited, or we list it as none, or whatever the descriptors are that you recommend.
Okay.
I think that is much more helpful than X's.
Sounds good.
X's and listing the actual words, which is kind of, looking back, I think that was kind of silly.
Yes, yes. If that wasn't recorded very clearly, we admit freely at this meeting that listing profane words for which we did think that maybe students shouldn't read to begin with, that we published them probably was something of a learning process. So the recommendation is not to list them, but to identify that it is contained in there using limited, some, or none.
Sounds good.
So moving on to grade bands and thresholds, this is actually a very significant part of the review and vetting process. For graphic violence, there are no grades bands that are listed in the policy currently, and the threshold is none. We certainly have learned through the many books that have been vetted that this is really unable to be executed with these. There can be no graphic violence. We're finding that there are very few choices that would meet that level. So what I recommend is that we redefine, or you redefine, the grade bands to a standard band, which is found in Education in America. It would be a K-5 for the elementary, and then breaking up the secondary into 2 bands, which is 6 through 8, which is oftentimes considered the middle level, and the 9-12, which is considered the upper level. And then again, if we go with those grade bands, we would set then thresholds within those grade bands, and they would correlate to each other. So the recommendation is for elementary grades K through 5, for graphic violence, the recommendation is there should be none, based on the definition. And for the secondary middle level, there should be limited. And then for the higher grade level, 9-12, there can be some. Now, I'll admit that those are very vague words, but they're probably still more constructive in order to vet them with our teachers and our team than the other words that were previously used. Okay.
And I do like changing it to 9-12 rather than breaking that up into 2. I think that that's more appropriate for the high school level to consider that to be the same level.
Yeah, and even the splitting the fifth and sixth grade, just looking ahead to potential, school, changing of the school stuff with the facilities, that would make sense to group those that way, as they'll be in the same buildings eventually, potentially. So I'm okay with that.
Okay. Going on to sexual content, again, the same thing. We are being consistent with our grade band recommendation and also the thresholds.
Again, I think when we had set these original thresholds of none, we were taking it very literal on when we're talking about sexual content, and when we actually saw the pieces that it's referring to, I think it's important to note that that's not quite going like the 6-8 to add that to limited. We added so many back in based on what we actually heard that were considered to be sexual content. So I appreciate moving this and talking this one through.
Yeah, and I guess if you go back and look at the definition, it said it'll be consistent with the HGG curriculum and obviously developmental and age appropriate. I'm okay with that too.
And then lastly, if it is if the recommendation is to clarify obscene language as profanity, we would then, this is the area where most of the work has been, so it would be a shift to be consistent with the other categories and change the grade bands and also to those same threshold levels.
Yeah.
Okay. So very lastly, or there's actually two more areas. We're going to move on to page 4, which is communication and notification. This is really the summary recommendation from all the sources, namely the parents, because they're the people that really are most impacted by this. So this would be the recommendation for prior to use, that the reading list shall be sent out to parents at the beginning of the year or at the semester. And the format is actually what they weighed in on, and they really did appreciate having the list. And some parents were like, that's okay, I don't need it. But either way, it's important to as we know, to be transparent and communicate. So we do recommend that the lower grades 5 and 6 still go in a paper format along with the electronic format because they're still getting out of elementary school. And then that the secondary level 7 through 12 would only go through electronic methods because that is actually the most secure method. Second one, the reading list shall include, as we've seen, I'm just reiterating that we would have a standard format that always includes our learning focus, our summary, and our notice of any content that contains the criteria for which we are vetting, including any sensitive topics. And the third one, parents and guardians shall have the choice to opt out of the permission process. And to clarify what that means is they would, at the beginning of the school year, say they do not want reading list permission slips. They will always get them, but they don't have to, the students do not have to return them. And that would allow their child to have full choice on all reading lists. I want to clarify, they're still going to get it. They just don't have to sign it. Okay, thank you. And in fact, I just want to clarify that our parents, some of our parents said they don't even want the slip. I can't have two different systems and maintain them with some accuracy, so I think we have to just err on the, we'll give it to you and you can trash it if you want, but I think it would be very difficult to have two different lanes to operate in, especially for our teachers. Okay. And lastly, the permission slips would be delivered for those who do select it in the same consistent paper and electronic formats for the lower grades and electronic method for the upper grades. Okay. Any questions or comments on communication notification? Okay. Thank you. And lastly, we have the format itself, and this is actually really important because it is the visible piece of the communication. So I'd like to just present that we want to standardize and simplify the actual notification and permission itself. So this notification would indicate any content that contains graphic violence, sexual content, or profanity. And if it should be permissible, but have some content within the thresholds that are established, we would then state it. And I think we had mentioned this earlier in the meeting, that if there was limited content, we would just state as limited, and we would not use the code of X. Secondly, profane words shall not be listed. Brief descriptions of content containing graphic violence and sexual content shall be listed, as it had been before, meaning that we would just indicate there was a war scene or there was something that happened, but nothing too extensive. And lastly, certainly our teachers do want to be able to be as communicative as possible, and so they would have the authority and the flexibility to include any rationale. There was a question about if we don't have profane words listed, what would that look like? And my answer, and that would be something that is very fundamentally important, is that if parents do want to know what those words are, the best person to answer is the teacher. And so we're always going to do everything we can to build that relationship between the teacher and the student, because that's really the nucleus of the learning team. And that actually concludes the list of recommendations.
That I'll make a motion to bring this proposed recommendations for the book club forward to the full board for approval. Is there a second? Second. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we've reached the end of our planned agenda. If there are no further questions or comments, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, June. All right, all in favor? Aye? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.